Welcome back to the IoT podcast. I'm your host, Tom White. Every week, we are joined by the biggest names in IoT to unravel the trends, misconceptions, and predictions for the Internet of Things. Before we get into today's episode, don't forget to subscribe on whichever platform you're watching or listening on, and turn on that notification bell so you're never out of the loop. In today's episode, I'm joined by Tom Raftery, former SAP VP and Futurist, host of the Climate Confident and Digital Supply Chain podcast. We'll be exploring the concept of IoT for good and talking about some of the real-life case study examples of IoT for good in healthcare, climate, drones and connected cars. We'll also get into what is a product as a service. What does that mean and why are companies shifting to this? This is not one to be missed. Before we get into the episode, shout out to one of our sponsors today, 5E Tech. 5E Tech are specialists in finding people who make technology a force for good in the world. They bridge the gap between talent and deep tech businesses around the globe. Click the link in the description to find out more. Before we get into the episode, shout out to one of our sponsors, IoT Tech Expo Europe, the leading event for digital twins, IoT and digital transformation. Tom, welcome to the IoT podcast.
Tom, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, I've been looking forward to this, Tom. As we were sort of saying backstage in our discovery call, you are no stranger to podcasts, to media, to social media, and IoT, and it's always a pleasure to have someone on the show well versed in this. I feel like it makes everything easier, right?
Not quite my first podcast. No. I run two podcasts, the Digital Supply Chain podcast, where I've published over 320 episodes so far, and the Climate Confident podcast, where I've published over 120 episodes so far. And those are just two podcasts. I've done other podcasts in the past. In fact, the first podcast I did was called Pod Leaders. And this was back around 2006, where you had to kind of hand roll your own RSS feed and stuff like that. But it was cool. It was one of the it was just about coming out at the time. 2006 was when podcasts were really kind of just starting to take off. And so I had some really interesting guests on that podcast. It was fascinating. So Pod Leaders were kind of leaders in the nascent Web 2 space at the time. So I had people on like Mike Arrington, who ran TechCrunch. I had people on like Vint Cerf, who is the internet evangelist for Google, for example. He's the co-inventor of TCP/IP, which is the kind of network protocol which enables the internet. So, some amazing guests on the podcast.
Yeah, I mean, fantastic. I mean, I think the word is schooled now. I feel schooled. I feel some sort of a baby, some sort of upstart now compared to you, Tom, when it comes to podcasts. But no, I think, just to touch on that before we get into a journey, I think that's one of the remarkable things with podcasts, the fact that the proliferation of niche for our US friends podcasts in chosen areas is really, really, really great. And the fact that you've had people on, inventor of TCP/IP. I mean, we had one of the kind of founding fathers of Wi-Fi on our podcast. It's just like, wow, this is like integral to society, not even to IoT. So the fact that you can just have nice conversations and publish it on the internet for people to enjoy, I think is a really, really nice thing, actually.
It's great. And as you say, they're so niche. Another one that I remember now that was on the podcast was Dan Bricklin, who was the inventor of VisiCalc, which was the world's first spreadsheet. So a precursor to Excel. Yeah. Absolutely amazing. But yeah, no, I mean, there are podcasts on literally anything, the most esoteric hobby or interest you might have. There's going to be a podcast on it. Not always a great podcast, but there's always going to be at least one. And so, it's fascinating that way that, you can find a podcast and just listen to it. I do it. I listen to podcasts when I'm doing things like walking dogs or working in the kitchen, cleaning up after lunch or whatever, going for a walk on a Saturday morning or something, or working in the garden or any of these kind of things where I don't need to be watching a screen, but I can still be taking in information. And so, for things that I happen to have particular interest in, I have podcast subscriptions for them, and I'm just listening to them as I'm driving is another great one use case. So as I'm driving down the road, I have a podcast on and I'm listening to it all the time.
Yeah, driving's a big one for me. I'm going out to Bonn next week, and I'm driving out there, and I've already kind of filtered down my 5 podcasts that I want to listen to. Now unfortunately I've got let 2 go and just pick 3, but but it's nice that you can do that because, as you say, you can concentrate on driving, but listen to something and absorb information. So I'm a big fan, and of course, 30, 40 years ago, as I tell my team regularly, if you wanted to find something out, you'd have to go to a library, right? And you'd have to look at books, and it'd be massively out of date. Now it's just vast amount of information is amazing. So yeah, both big fans of it, and obviously spend a lot of time in there. Gets me on quite nicely then, I suppose. So your background, Tom, quick kind of overview. How did you get into the tech world and get into being such a prolific podcaster yourself?
Yeah, so I'm a biologist by training. So when I was doing biology in University College Cork, when I was in 3rd year of a 4-year degree, our professor and head of department told us that we had to hand in our 3rd and 4th year projects on a disk. And this was the first time. Prior to that, it had always been handwritten projects you handed in. Now it had to be handed in on a disk. And the department had 2 computers at the time, and they were old Amstrad 1512s, if anyone remembers those. They didn't have an internal hard disk. So you had 3 5.25-inch floppy drives, one with the operating system on it, one with the applications you wanted to use on it, WordStar in this case, and one with your own data on it. So you'd swap in the application disk and your own disk, so you could save the stuff onto your disk, and you were working in RAM. Really, really weird setup. And of course, because there was only 2 in the department, there was always a queue for them, and there was people waiting for their turn. And if you ever made a mistake, it went beep, and everyone turned around and went, there's that Raftery idiot again who doesn't know what he's doing. So I was very lucky though, because that particular summer, and the summer before, I had worked abroad in the UK for those 2 summers. And somebody had mentioned to me that if you applied to the UK revenue, you could get your tax back because, I was a student. And so I did. So I got a big check for 2 summers worth of work in the UK. And so suddenly I had this check with money, and I had this requirement. And I said to myself, why don't I buy a computer? And that way I can have it, work on it at home, and hand in my project on my own disk that I've worked on at home, and I don't have to be queuing for the computer, and I can make as many mistakes as I want, and no one be looking sideways at me. And so I bought a Mac. And the reason I bought a Mac was I had read somewhere, I knew nothing about computers, I'd read somewhere that Macs were user-friendly, whatever that meant, but it sounded good. So I went out and I bought a Mac, and I bought a book called the Mac Bible, which was kind of a how-to. And I read the book from cover to cover, and I got really interested and enthused about the Mac and started teaching myself as much as I could about it. And I handed in the project on disk, went really well. And then I went back doing postgrad. And during postgrad, I said to the department, I could teach the undergrads how to use computers if you want. And they said, great. So I did. And then I went to a local computer store and said to them, I'm teaching 3rd and 4th year computer classes in the university. I could teach your clients computers as well if you wanted. And they said, great. And so I started doing that. And I'm very ADD, so I'm always trying to get something, whatever's new and flashy and that kind of thing. So computers and technology were at the time, and I was getting really interested in those. And the local computer company was giving me more work than I was able to handle. So I brought a few friends in with me, and we were giving computer classes. And then we started doing programming for their customers. And eventually I went full-time at this because I was getting more money from that than I was in the postgrad work. I was doing a lot more, and it had a far better prospects as well, because I was looking at the postdocs in the department who were scrounging around for 2 and 3 month projects, and these were people with PhDs, and I was getting more in a week than they were in a month. So it made a huge amount of sense. And so set up a computer company. This was in 95, ran that through to 2002, where we merged with another company. And the kind of stuff we were doing was really bleeding edge. We started off doing websites, but then we did database-backed websites. And of course, a database-backed website is just another word for software as a service. So that's what we were doing. We developed the first game for a mobile phone in Ireland back in 1999, and we sold it to Aircell, who were the then mobile phone provider in Ireland. It was simple. It was done in WML, and it was a game of Hangman or something like that, but it was the first. And then in 2002, we joined with this other company. I went in as CTO, brought the programming team with me, and we were developing for that company. We were taking their Access database and converting it into a web app, and it was a reverse logistics ERP application. And we sold it to the likes of Philips, and it was software as a service. People like Philips and Tyco, who were customers, what they got was a login, and so there was no software delivery. It was they got a login and they could manage all their customers there. We could upload their data for them using CSV files and the whole thing. So that got me very much into the whole internet, the whole technology side of things. And then again, as I say, because I'm very ADD, I started getting into things like blogging and podcasting. And so in 2004, I left the company and set up a social media consultancy. So you can imagine social media consultancy in 2004 was a bit early to market. I ran that through to 2008. And in the meantime, the company I had worked for, I was still very good friends with the MD. So myself and another guy decided to set up a data center. And at the time, there was 8 data centers in Ireland, and they were all in Dublin, and we were based in Cork. So there was no data center in Cork. So we said, okay, well, we'll set up the first one in Cork. And we decided to go for it. We were bootstrapping it, but it was a serious data center. And to prove that, I said, with the social media background, I said, why don't we open source it? So at the time, data centers were very proprietary about their information, but I said, no, let's go the opposite way. Let's open source it. So we completely open sourced the development of the data center, everything from the arrival of the diggers to dig out the foundations, right the way through to the arrival of customer kit. And we decided in building the data center that because we were bootstrapping it, we had to manage the costs very carefully. And there are 3 main costs in running a data center. There's staff, there's power, and there's connectivity. In terms of the staff, we did sweat equity. In terms of the connectivity, we built the data center on top of a hill overlooking the city of Cork. And we put a 24-meter mast in the courtyard. And then we resold space on the mast to the local wireless internet service providers so that they were buying through us their connectivity, which brought our per meg per month cost down. And then the third main cost, as I said, is power. And so we went to town on that. We designed the data center to be as low power as possible. And we called it a hyper energy efficient data center. And because we were blogging all this, documenting the whole thing with Flickr, with blogs, with video, we had a couple of open days as well. That got me a big name in the green energy space. And so in 2008, I moved to Spain, where I live now, Seville. And I was moving for personal rather than professional reasons. And so I didn't speak Spanish, so I needed a job that would allow me to work remotely in English. And because I had done this Pod Leaders podcast that I talked about, I had a very nice Rolodex of contacts. So I reached out to a good few of them using LinkedIn. So what I did there was I cherry-picked, I had about 500 contacts on LinkedIn at the time, and I cherry-picked about 80 of them, and I sent them a message saying, as you know, I'm moving to Spain next month, and I'll need a new job. What would be really handy is if you could leave a recommendation for me here on LinkedIn. So it was an easy ask. And from those 80, I got 25 recommendations and 4 job offers. And then I was running a green energy conference, and a guy called James Governor from Redmonk was coming over. He was one of the people I invited to speak at it. And dropping him back to the airport, I said to him, listen, James, if you ever need someone to open the Spanish arm of Redmonk, I'd be happy to do so. And he kind of went, let me think about that. So he came back to me. So I had 5 job offers and I went with the RedMonk one. So joined RedMonk, ran the energy and sustainability practice of RedMonk through to 2016, which we termed Green Monk, obviously. And then towards the end of 2015, I was starting to get a bit kind of restless, and a couple of companies approached me independently and they said, listen, Tom, if you ever think of leaving, come and have a chat with us. And that kind of planted a seed. And so early in 2016, I said to the guys, look, I'll work till the end of February and then I'm out. Then I wrote a post on my blog saying, leaving RedMonk. Nothing lined up yet, but I'm talking to a number of companies. So if anyone else wants to get in touch, feel free. The window's still open for another while. And I had some very interesting conversations arise out of that. Elon Musk got in touch and asked me to come and join Tesla. He wanted me, in his words, he wanted me to be the voice of Tesla. And SAP got in touch. And yeah, no, I had a half-hour call with Elon. That was funny as well, because you know the way, or maybe it's just me, but first thing I do in the morning before I even turn on the light when I wake up is I grab the phone and I scroll through the notifications on the screen to see what's come in overnight. And as I'm scrolling through this particular morning, I see Office of the CEO Tesla, and I'm going up and I go, whoa, what was that? And I pull it back down again and I click on it, and it opens up with an email from this woman called Erin Gallagher. And she says, hi, Tom, I'm the executive assistant to Elon Musk, CEO of Tesla and SpaceX. And I'm kind of thinking, yeah, I know who Elon is, don't worry. And she said, Elon would like a chat with you. Are you free next Thursday at, I can't remember, 5 p.m. or whatever it was? And I looked at it and I went, oh, no. And I had to write back to her and go, hey, Erin, the time you're proposing is 3 o'clock in the morning here in Spain, where I'm based. And while I would normally be happy to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning to have a chat with Elon Musk, that particular morning, I'm getting up at 5 to go to Germany for 2 days of interviews with SAP. Is there any chance at all he could do it the following week? And she wrote back very graciously going, absolutely no problem, Tom. I completely understand. How's 7 p.m. your time the following Thursday? And I thought, perfect. So 7 p.m. the following Thursday, phone rang, and hold the line for Elon Musk. And so I had a chat with him, and that was nice. The only downside was he wanted me to go and move to Palo Alto. And at the same time, SAP were offering me a great role where they didn't care where I lived. So they were happy for me to stay here in Seville. And when I looked at the kind of cost of living for having a nice house like I have here in Palo Alto, you know, it was crazy. You'd be talking, for the kind of house I have here, you'd be talking over 10 million in Palo Alto, easy. And I didn't really want the family to go through a step down in quality of life, which that would have entailed. So what I did was I took the offer that I had from SAP, and then the cost of living in Palo Alto, and brought, you know, because Tesla asked me how much I wanted. So because I had this great offer from SAP, I was able to kind of go, yeah, to have a similar quality of life in Palo Alto, here's how much I would need. And they kind of went, yeah, that's not going to work for us. So that was the end of that. So joined SAP. I was recruited in as an IoT evangelist. And then shortly after joining SAP, I started in September 2016. So the following spring, it's kind of a spring cleaning thing. Every year in SAP in spring, there are reorgs. And of course, it was a big one in 2017. And the IoT function was given to another team. So I said to my manager, look, I can't really be calling myself an IoT evangelist anymore, can I? And he said, no. I said, okay, well, what if I call myself an innovation evangelist? And he said, works for me. So went to LinkedIn, went to my email sig, switched IoT evangelist to innovation evangelist, and stayed as the innovation evangelist in IoT until late last year, when unfortunately I was impacted by the tech layoffs.
Wow. What a background. Yeah, absolutely. I'm still getting over the conversation with Elon Musk and turning Elon Musk down to rebook it. But I think if anything, that probably was a good thing, right?
Yeah.
Because it kind of cements the fact that people want to talk to you even more. But what an amazing background, absolutely fantastic. Very entrepreneurial as well, obviously from the early days in Ireland, to building the first data center, buying a computer, etc.
Yeah.
It brought back memories of me, actually. When I was 16, I had the choice to buy a moped, right, or a laptop. And I bought a laptop, and it was probably the best decision I ever made, because it got me into coding, and coding got me into staffing, and here I am now, running an IoT podcast. So it's a tremendous background. And I guess one of the things that I'm really keen on to discover more about you, Tom, is where this kind of passion for IoT for good, the climate positive technology as a force for good came from, because I don't think this is baked into everyone in tech, right?
Probably not.
Yeah, but it seems with you, you're very keen on that. Where did that stem?
So yeah, as I mentioned, I'm a graduate biologist, and even before that, I've always had a love of animals and a love of nature, probably in large part inculcated in me by my dad, who, used to take me to the countryside most weekends, and we go for walks in the countryside. And he was a great lover of nature too. We'd always watch nature documentaries together. He founded a wildlife park in Cork in Ireland called Photo Wildlife Park. It's a centre for the breeding of endangered species, particularly. The year it opened in '83, it was the largest cheetah breeding centre outside of Africa, and since has been responsible for breeding lots and lots of cheetahs, as amongst other animals. They have lots of monkeys there as well. Excuse me. Zebras, giraffe, singular horned oryx, all these kind of things. I was involved in that too. And so always had a love of nature. And then when I got into technology and I could start to kind of bring my two passions of sustainability and technology together, it was kind of ideal. So the idea of having green data centers and running conferences on green technologies was great. And a lot of the stuff I did in SAP was as well talking about how to make technology work for good, how to make it work for better, for bettering the planet, and making, as SAP's tagline, making the world better and improving people's lives, that kind of thing. So that was fantastic. And a lot of what I was doing was talking about things like the energy transition, how the world is shifting away from fossil fuels for energy generation and moving towards renewables, and how, electric vehicles are starting to be a thing. And, I was talking about these kind of things back in the 2015, for example. I spoke at a Tesla event in Belgium, I think it was. I've been writing about these kind of things for a while. In fact, one of the reasons that Elon Musk reached out to me was because one of the posts I wrote on my blog was about him, and it was about how he has another secret master plan. So I think he saw that, and that was one of the reasons he reached out.
What was that post? What was that plan? I'm dying to know.
Yeah, so he famously wrote about his secret master plan in 2006 to shift the world to electric vehicles, and the 3 stages he was going to go through to get there. And what I posited in he has another secret master plan was that they would be using electric vehicles as virtual power plants. And so that you would be able to use, and what else? There was a couple of other things in it that I was positing, that he would be using them as I think a robo taxi fleet as well. I think I mentioned in it, but the big thing I think was about the virtual power plants. Both the wall batteries they have and the cars could be used as virtual power plants, and that way that would help. That would ensure that people's one of the myths around electric vehicles is that if enough of them are rolled out, the grid will collapse. And of course, this has proven to be completely mythical, because you just look at Norway, where 90% of new vehicle sales are EVs right now, and they've seen a 7% increase in electricity demand. So it's it won't cause the grid to collapse, but in any case, EVs, if they're bidirectional, can actually secure the grid by at times when demand is high on the grid, they could actually push electricity back into the grid if needed. And of course, this would be done at a very small scale. So say you had an EV that was plugged in and the battery was at 60% or 70%, you could, give 5% of your battery to the grid. But if 1,000 people gave 5% of their battery to the grid, then, that's the difference between firing up a coal-fired power plant or just pulling it from cars. And similarly with, if you have wall batteries, same kind of idea. So that was, I think, what I said in the post at the time.
Yeah, I mean it's fabulous, really, isn't it? As you say, this energy reuse. We've spoken in the past on the podcast about energy harvesting and the benefits of that actually from an IoT point of view. But I think from a IoT for good standpoint, there's lots of different examples that you've spoken about in the past and that you've gone on record talking about. What are some of the favorite examples that you've got, both in either a consumer or commercial context, of IoT being used as a real force for good?
Yeah, good question. In 2018, my older son was 14 going on 15. And 3 days shy of his 15th birthday, he was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And it was shocking, devastating. We no history of diabetes in the family. And for people who are unaware, type 1 is the bad diabetes. It's the one where you have to take blood sugar measurements 5 or 6 times a day and inject yourself with insulin in order to literally stay alive. And so the way you do that is you get a little pinprick and you prick your finger and you squeeze out a little bit of blood and you put that onto what's called a glucometer, and that tells you your blood sugar reading at that moment. And you do this, as I said, 5 or 6 times a day, 7 days a week, etc., etc. And this was, this is the life, or was the life, of lots of people with diabetes, until there's this device called the Libre Freestyle sensor. It's not the only one. There's a couple of different ones out in the market now. But basically, it's a sensor which my son attaches to the back of his arm and leaves it there for 2 weeks. And after the 2 weeks, takes it off and puts a new sensor on the other arm for the next 2 weeks. And what does it do? It means he doesn't have to prick his finger and squeeze out that drop of blood, because it is measuring his blood sugar level, not 5 or 6 times a day, but rather once every minute. So instead of having 5 or 6 readings per day, he now has 1,440 readings per day. And it has a built-in NFC and Bluetooth chip. So he can just swipe his phone over it, even, he doesn't have to pull up his sleeve, just over the area. It downloads the information to his phone. The information goes from his phone. It's uploaded to a personal private cloud that his medical team have access to. Every time he does a reading, I get a flash on my phone and on my watch telling me he's just had a reading, so I can monitor it as well. And his medical team have full access to it, so they can see how he's doing with his blood sugar levels and, advise him on slight adjustments to take in the amount of insulin he injects and things like that. So you asked what's my favorite use of IoT. I would say that right there, because, it's got the smarts and connectivity and the sensor. It's got the cloud delivered analytics for his blood sugar levels, the whole big data story. It's got it all, and it's keeping my son alive.
Yeah, incredibly personal and poignant device there. Thanks for sharing that.
Or not poignant, because it's changed his life, because he now doesn't have to be sticking needles in his fingers and squeezing out blood all the time. It's made his life a lot easier. And it means he has far more granular data to help him better control his blood sugar levels. So it's improved his life significantly.
Yeah. I had an ex-partner actually about 10 years ago that had type 1 diabetes. And I can understand, because there was quite a few times where she got quite low, and we had to kind of have like orange juices and various sugars straight away, and sometimes it was actually quite scary. And then she was fed up of having quite thick skin on the finger from having a pinprick constantly, and it really kind of got her down, right?
Yeah.
So I think these devices back then were kind of in the early stages actually. So now seeing it, described as you said, it's fantastic to see that advancement and to be able to do that.
And I had a friend in university back in the 80s who was type 1 as well. And how she had to measure her blood sugar was with a urine sample. So not even squeezing blood out of the finger, urine sample, and into a little bottle which would change color depending on the amount of sugar in your blood. And it would tell you what your blood sugar was like 6 hours earlier. So, the advances that have come on in the last 40 years is just stunning, absolutely stunning,
And it's so fantastic to talk about these types of things, because I think sometimes, especially at the moment, when generative AI is just taking over, and it's good and it has its merits, but where are the kind of real impactful stories like this? And this is why it's so great to have these types of conversations, to be able to uncover them and to raise awareness, because IoT really, really can act as a force for good in so many ways. And as you say, this is a very personal story to you, and I really appreciate you sharing it.
Yeah.
So we spoke in our discovery call to move on to another aspect. There was it the drone story you were telling me about as well? That was a fascinating one to talk about.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, so there's a YouTuber called Mark Rober, and he's ex-NASA, and he does some great videos, really entertaining videos about all kinds of things like taking on scammers and things like that, and how to build things. He builds mazes in his garden to try and stop squirrels taking bird food and all kinds of fun things like that. But he posted a video recently, a really good one, about a company called Zipline, who are based out of Africa. And what they do is they use drones for delivering supplies to hospitals, remote hospitals and clinics. And it's an absolutely fascinating use case. The company are called Zipline, and they've got a whole setup. They've got 2 bases where they can cover the entire country. And the drones they have are custom-made drones. And they launch them off a catapult, and they're literally launching them every 90 seconds. They're sending them out with delivery. So they get a phone call in from a hospital or a clinic, and we need this. Okay, put it on a drone, boom, out it goes, and it arrives at the clinic however many minutes or whatever later. The drones cover about 130 kilometers or something like that. That's the kind of range they have. And, they do a U-turn. So they drop the package with a little parachute, it sails down, and then the drone comes back, and they have a special device for catching the drone. So it's caught and recovered and put into, the battery taken out and put on charge, and then a new battery put in, and off it goes again. And so it's transformed the delivery of things like blood, and they didn't talk about organs, but medicines as well, to these remote hospitals and clinics throughout the country. Is absolutely spectacular. The use of drones, we see massive use of drones now in Ukraine, for example, on both sides. But drone technology is changing so many things. I saw an ad recently for a new software platform for a company that have drones that are helping utility companies check their power lines, for example. Before, that used to be done by people dangling from helicopters. And now they get drones to go up, and the drones can do it autonomously and come back, and the software platform can examine the video footage from the drone and go, yep, you have a problem there, that kind of thing. So, they're being used for remote maintenance on wind turbines as well, same kind of idea. The drones are having a huge impact on so many aspects of life, not just hobbyists like myself who have one over in the corner there, for example, but also for serious professional reasons as well.
Yeah, I think the drone stories that you hear are incredible. I went to a wildlife photography of the year exhibition in Bristol, in the southwest of the UK, and about 80% of all of the photographs were done on a DJI Mavic 2 Pro, right?
Yeah.
And they were all drone shots. And the one that won the competition was it was a picture of some bears in an abandoned town in a remote part of Russia, I think it was.
Wow.
And they were just crawling through this one of these abandoned houses in this abandoned town, looking for food, and they'd come inland significantly because of ocean issues and lack of food, etc. And it was so powerful, but also the advancing aspects of drone technology, as you say. It's one that I'm fascinated by as well, and I think that zipline case is phenomenal, isn't it? And it makes me feel a lot more comfortable and happy about drone technology, because from a military and defense point of view, you mentioned Ukraine. I can understand it, but I think as a kind of society, as a race, we need to be promoting the good aspects of what drones can be used first.
Oh yeah,
right.
I was talking to an executive from a company called ERP, and despite the name, they have nothing to do with ERP software. What they are, the ERP stands for Elephants, Rhinos, and People, and they're a non-profit based out of Southern Africa. And what they do is they use drones to detect and deter poachers. So they have, they fly the drones over these big areas, and they can detect poachers from quite far away. And then they can send in rangers if they think there are poachers operating in the area. And they have sensors around, seismic sensors around as well, which can detect movement. And they use these in combination with the drones. And they have another couple of interesting initiatives as well. Because what they're doing, as well as protecting the elephants and the rhinos, is they're also helping the people in the region work in conjunction with the animals. So, for example, one of the problems with the elephants is they tend to trample on farmland, which of course means that the local people are, it annoys them, obviously. So what they do is they've set up fences to make sure the elephants don't trample on the farmland. And what they do is they string beehives on the fences, because the elephants don't like bees. And so this deters the elephants, but also the beehives make honey. And so the local people can harvest the honey, so that they tend the beehives, make sure that the elephants don't come near them. They get the honey from it, so it becomes a whole, and they can sell the honey, so it becomes a whole new economic model and business case for the local people. So they're helping the people there as well as helping the animals. So it's a beautiful little system they've got operating there. And they're running schools and doing things like that as well. They give the kids in the area free bikes as long as they attend school. So, lots of lovely initiatives like that.
Yeah, I bet there's hundreds, if not thousands, of these that you probably never get to hear about, and I love hearing about them, because it's so amazing, and the various different aspects. And I guess that's the beauty of IoT. It's just, it really encompasses so many different aspects and so many different ways of connecting people. And again, the definition, I believe, of IoT, as per I think Oxford's English Dictionary, is connecting objects and environments to the internet, right? Yeah. Nothing could be more significant to that than the examples that we've just spoken about, actually. So, I think it's absolutely fantastic. Tom, moving on, if I can.
Sure.
One of the things that you go on record talking about quite a bit is the concept of product as a service. Oh, yeah. And I wondered if you could help define for our viewers and listeners what that means, and what companies are offering this, and why IoT could play a part in it.
Sure, yeah. So product as a service is the idea of moving away from ownership of stuff to subscribing to stuff. So the example that everyone would be familiar with is, you no longer go to the DVD store or the CD shop for your music or videos. You go to Netflix or Amazon, or, and you on Netflix, you can download or watch whatever it is you want, whenever you want, or Spotify for music, or Apple Music, or whatever your preference is. So, we're not we've subscribed now to these services rather than going out and buying individual DVDs or CDs. And this movement away from ownership is pervading other aspects of industry as well. And a cool example of that is the light bulb industry. So back when shortly after light bulbs were first invented, there was a problem with their economics. And the problem with their economics was they were lasting too long. And so the light bulb manufacturers weren't making enough money. So they got together I want to say it was around the 1920s. They had a meeting and they had this little kind of mini cartel where they decided, okay, we will limit the lifetime of our bulbs by design to around 2,000 hours. And roughly the economics of that means we'll make money on every light bulb we sell, which hadn't been the case before. So inbuilt obsolescence, light bulbs lasted about 2,000 hours right the way through to about 2008, I want to think, was roughly when the world started passing regulations to move us off incandescent light bulbs and onto CFLs initially and subsequently LEDs. And so the problem with that for the light bulb manufacturers is the LED light bulbs have a lifetime of about 25,000 hours, not 2,000 hours, and they don't cost, 13 and a half times as much. They might cost 2 or 3 times as much. So obviously, this is a huge problem for light bulb manufacturers because for the amount of light that they're producing, they're getting far less money. They get 2 to 3 times the amount of money for an LED light bulb, but it's going to last 13 times as much or more. And so what the light bulb manufacturers have to do is change their business model. So now what you're starting to see is the Osrams and the Philips and the others starting to do lighting as a service, not so much in the consumer space, but more in the industrial space. So an example is the city of Los Angeles. The city of Los Angeles doesn't own any streetlights. All of the streetlights in Los Angeles are owned by Philips. And these are smart, connected LED light bulbs. And so they're connected because they're sending back the information to Philips all the time so that Philips knows exactly how many lumens of light were delivered and so how much to bill the city for. But also, because they're connected, they're sending back their status. And so Philips can see at any point in time if any bulb is likely to fail. And if it is, they can send an engineer to site to swap it out so that it's swapped out before it fails, so that the city isn't without light on any particular street, and so that Philips aren't without revenue from any bulb at any point in time. So they're maximizing their revenue. But of course, because the bulbs still belong to Philips, they don't want to send that engineer out. They want to send as few engineers out as possible. So now there's no incentive to have inbuilt obsolescence. The opposite is the case. They're now engineering these bulbs to last longer and longer and longer. So their average lifetime has gone from 25 to 50 to 75,000 hours. So it's a huge sustainability win right there because, the same bulb now lasts 3 times longer, gives light. It means the city of Los Angeles always has lights, operational streetlights when it needs them. Philips has revenue coming in from its lights, and so it's a sustainable business model for Philips. And so that whole shift away from ownership to product as a service, in this case lighting as a service, works for everyone. It's a win-win-win, and it's all made possible because the bulbs are smart and connected. They're IoT devices, to your point.
Yeah, I think the technology is fantastic, and thanks for sharing that. One of my personal view on this is, and I'm eager to hear your thoughts on this, and this is quite a provocative question, but I think it's important. Do you think overall there may be something sinister lying between this kind of product as a service, microtransactions type of culture that we seem to be going on, right? Do you think it's part of a slightly larger agenda that people will probably end up actually owning very, very few things in the future? And I just wanted to know what your thoughts are on that before we get on to other case studies, because there's a lot of talk, isn't there? And there's some speculation around whether or not we could go too far with this. And I think the technology itself is amazing, but
Yep.
Technology is it's like a tool, isn't it? In fact, we say this on our website, like any tool, it could be good and bad depending on whose hands it's in. But What are your thoughts on that? Is there a point that we could go too far with product as a service and microtransactions?
Potentially. I think the movement to the product as a service and away from ownership is happening slowly. So I think people will adjust because it's not a sudden change. As I say, it's happening slowly. People will adjust and become happy enough with it. It's not. I don't see per se anything sinister there. It should mean that the devices that are manufactured have less obsolescence, so it's more sustainable. It should mean that because they are more sustainable, you should be paying as well less for them. So it should be saving money for people. And it should as well, because the devices are not yours, because they belong to the manufacturer, they should fail far less as well. So you should have far more reliable, better quality kit, which fails less, which costs less, which is more sustainable. So no, I don't see anything particularly sinister about it. No, I mean, I can imagine if everything is, then you've got to manage your outgoings carefully. But apart from that, as long as you can manage your outgoings, you should be fine.
Yeah, and it's an interesting point actually, and I think the cost, the monthly cost as opposed to the overall cost, it's something that people would need to calculate, and that's the same with any sort of SaaS model, right? That we have in technology. But I think the sustainability aspect that you touched upon there in your answer is actually another case study, which would be great to talk about. So the EV case study, you've spoken about battery life increasing significantly. It'd be great to expand upon that so people could understand the potential that we've got here as well.
Sure, yeah. So one thing that a lot of people probably don't realize about EVs is that the batteries in an EV are not like the batteries in your phone or your tablet. The ones in your phone and your tablet, you can see their kind of capacity go down after a year or so of usage or 2 years of usage. Whereas the batteries in an EV, they typically lose about 1% of capacity for roughly every 40,000 kilometers driven. So, or 30 to 40,000 kilometers driven. So that means after you've driven 300,000 kilometers, your car is still at 90% of original capacity, or even higher, depending on the car and the battery. But it's usually 300,000 to 400,000 kilometers, you're still at 90%. And what manufacturers do of EVs is they give a warranty of, depends on the manufacturer, but Kia have like a 7-year warranty on the battery, which they say if it goes below 80% in that time, they'll replace the battery. So it's a full warranty, and other manufacturers have slightly different warranties, but typically there's a full warranty there. Anything goes wrong with the battery. The battery life, as I said, is so when it reaches 80%. So I have an EV. The EV I have is a Kia Niro. The battery in it is a 64 kilowatt hour battery. So not the biggest, but it's, the ones in the ID4 are 77, for example. But mine's a 64 kilowatt hour battery, gets me about 500 kilometers of range, which is nice because it's a very efficient car. If I lose 20% of that and I'm down at 80% of capacity, that's still about 50 kilowatt hours of battery. I'm not good at maths, but it's in or around that ballpark. So 50 kilowatt hours. If you think about the Tesla Powerwall batteries that you strap onto the side of your house, those are 14 kilowatt hours. So the battery in this at 80% of original capacity is still 3 Powerwalls, worth of storage. And what's actually happening is the cost of batteries is falling year on year on year. The energy density of them is increasing year on year. So the energy density of batteries today is 3x what it was in 2010. And we're looking now at a case where the life of the batteries is increasing as well. They're going from a life of 300,000 to 500,000 kilometers or more, reaching 80%, to the latest batteries from Scania, the truck manufacturer. They said that their batteries will last 1.5 million kilometers. And the new Tesla 4680 batteries have been shown to have a lifetime of about 3.5 million kilometers. Now, that's just mind blowing, because the average life of the body of a car in Europe today is at around 330,000 kilometers. So if you have a battery that can last 10 times the expected lifetime of a vehicle, then suddenly that changes the whole economics and the whole potential business case for making electric vehicles. Why wouldn't you shift to the product as a service model that we talked about earlier, where you make an EV, you give it to someone for a 3 to 5 year rental, and then you take it back after that time, give them another one. But that when you take back, you buff out any scrapes, put a new coat of paint on it, put in a new suite of electronics, so it's got the latest technology and gizmos, and you send it back out again with a battery that's 3 or 4 years old, but of a potential lifetime of 100 years. You rent it out again as nearly new with all the latest gizmos, and you, for the price, or for using about 5% of the material to create a completely new vehicle, you have one which is as new, and you're giving it to people and they've got the latest technology in it. Because cars today are becoming like our phones. They're becoming technological devices. And now, if a car is 5, 6, 7 years old, if it doesn't have built-in Bluetooth, or if it doesn't have USB, you're kind of going, really? Everyone wants their cars now with the latest gizmos, the latest technology, CarPlay or Android Auto built in, so you can use your phone, all these kind of things. And as these things advance, the lifetime of a car is going to get shorter, the same way the lifetime of our phones gets shorter as they become more technological devices. So if we shift to this kind of model, we can get a nearly new car every 3, 4, 5 years for a monthly rental. And I mean, car manufacturers are doing the longish term rental already. You can, here in Spain at least, I can go to Volkswagen, I can go get a rental Volkswagen for a 3 to 5 year lease where I'm paying 300 to 400 euros a month, and that covers either 10 or 12,000 kilometers a year. You can go, if you pay more, you can get more kilometers per year. It covers your maintenance, it covers your insurance, it covers your tax. Everything is all in one monthly payment of 300 to 400 euros, depending on the model, of course, and depending on how many miles you're going to go for. And so it's just that, it's cars as a service. And if you're running an EV, of course, your cost per month are low anyway, because your cost of fuel is very low for an EV, because you're just putting electricity into it, which mostly you're getting at home, and it's a fraction the cost of petrol or diesel. And as well as that, your cost of maintenance is at least half what it would be for an internal combustion engine vehicle. So your costs have come way down. Your the carbon footprint of making this nearly new vehicle has dropped 90% or more, because you're only just putting a few bits of electronics in it and giving it a buff of paint and some new wheels maybe. So it's a huge sustainability win, and it's a huge win for us as consumers as well, because we're getting cool fancy items all the time and at a fraction of the cost of a carbon footprint.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic example, and you speak so knowledgeably on this, right? For me, the most poignant thing that you've said there is the battery life. I mean, that has Tesla going on record to say that the potential. What was it again? Was it
3.5 million kilometers?
Yeah, that's crazy.
It's actually 3.6 million, if I remember correctly.
3.6 million kilometers. Yeah. So,
thanks again for IoT Tech Expo Europe for sponsoring today's episode. IoT Tech Expo Europe brings together Europe's brightest minds to talk about cutting-edge technologies in one place. Experience top-level discussions, innovative IoT innovations and strategies. Mark your calendars for the 26th and 27th of September 2023, when IoT Tech Expo Europe returns to the vibrant city of Amsterdam. I'll be there. Will you? Get your tickets at iottechexpo.com/Europe. The link will be in the description.
In terms of the actual material needed, this can offset that, right? Because there's talk around the precious metals in building these batteries, etc. But clearly, if it can last for that period of time, then that's a good thing, and you could offset from actually having to build a whole new car, the cost of building a whole new car, the panels, the equipment, so on and so forth.
Exactly. And the other thing that people are unaware of is if you stack up the amount of mining and milling and stuff that needs to be done for EVs versus fossil fuels, you actually have to do about 400 times more mining for fossil fuels than you do for EVs when you take into account all the oil and gas and everything that's mined for those. So shifting from fossil fuels to EVs cuts drastically the amount of mining and milling that will have to be done.
Yeah, absolutely. Tom, I think we could talk for hours about various subjects and various things. It's lovely to talk to someone that's so well versed in all of this and so knowledgeable in different areas, and a subject really close to my heart and that of the podcast. So thank you so much for all these insights.
Not at all.
The future, I kind of want to get to that point before we wrap up the show today. How can IoT maintain its presence as a force for good, and are we shaping up in the right way? Do you see further advancements like this taking center stage and people talking about them? And what can we do to make sure that this positive momentum keeps going?
Well, I mean, I don't think there's anything that we need to do per se. I think just the technological advances mean that these devices are going to become smaller, cheaper, more powerful, and so they're going to become ubiquitous. We'll get to a point where we'll have IoT devices on our clothes, for example, to monitor the status of our clothes. Because if we get into a world where, you're doing second-hand clothes, or you're doing circular economy of clothes, for example, then having a device on your clothes which is light enough that it can be on your clothes without any discomfort, but is able to monitor that lifetime usage of that item of clothing. And so say, whether or not it's suitable to go into a second life, or whether it now needs to be disassembled and made into a new garment, those kind of things. So smaller, lighter, cheaper, more powerful is I think where we're headed with IoT. And, it's been headed that way for the last, this isn't a profound prediction. IoT has been around a long time, back when it was machine to machine back in the aughts. And, the devices constantly get smarter, better, faster, cheaper. And that's only going to continue.
Yeah. I'll have to send you an episode to a chap called Christian Dalgard that we did some months back. He runs a business called Smart Textiles, actually, about interlacing circuit boards and silicon into fabric, right?
Nice.
It was a really interesting episode. But Tom, thank you so much for coming on to the IoT podcast show today. Honestly, it's been excellent to have you here. And
Thanks.
As I said, the insights are fantastic. I'm gonna wrap up with some quick fire questions if I can, as we always do. Well, one that's going to be really interesting. You seem like a man that's skilled in many different areas, from your entrepreneurial background, rising through the ranks at SAP, and where you have been. So this is a really good one. If you could learn any new skill, and what would it be and why?
Wow. I think gardening would be one that I would like to be able to do properly. I'd love to have a vegetable patch out the back there and, grow some of my own food and veg. It's a bit of a left field answer. I don't think that's what you were expecting, but that's
I like it.
That's something I'd love to do.
Yeah, I like it. No, absolutely. I completely agree. I think, growing your own and making sure, from, what do they call it? From field to plate, or from soil to plate?
Oh yeah, farm to fork.
Farm to fork, yeah. That's a nice concept. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, I like that. What's a quote that you live by, Tom?
Every day's a school day.
Ah, nice. Yeah,
I
think I can tell you live by that. Yeah, I can tell you definitely live by that.
Love it. Yeah.
We've had a couple of people on the past, and I think they sometimes struggle for quotes, but you knew that off the tip of your tongue. So yeah, I can definitely know that. And a final one, and an interesting one, and curious to see the answer on this, because you've got so many IoT use cases under your belt. But what is the most unusual or unexpected IoT use case you've ever come across in a personal, professional context?
I think the use of audio sensors in, I think it was Los Angeles, on streetlights to locate shootings is probably,
Wow.
yeah. That's so they triangulate where a shooting has taken place based on audio sensors on the streetlights and the street furniture in, I think it was Los Angeles.
Oh,
I thought
that's
that was
excellent.
Yeah.
Wow.
Weird, and not quite wonderful, just weird. So.
Yeah, I think, definitely weird for us, being European, UK, Irish, right? To have that, but the power of what we can do with streetlights and in general the kind of digital pins. We had I think it was Jeffrey DeCoo from the Autonomous Institute, I think it was, a couple of years ago now, talking about what we can put into streetlights and the amount of tech that can go in a streetlight and why it's so beneficial, because they're everywhere, right? You already spoken earlier about the light bulbs, right? So I think
it's not just that they're everywhere. It's that we've taken out the incandescent bulb, which would have required a couple of 100 watts, and we've put in LEDs, which require tens of watts. So there's far more power available now for stringing other things onto them.
Yes. Tom, we're going to have to wrap up. It's absolutely excellent today. Thank you so much for coming on to the IoT podcast. Where can people find out more about you online, on socials and websites, perhaps?
Sure, yeah. Wherever, I guess. I have a blog at tomraftery.com. I'm on LinkedIn and Twitter, easy to find there, at Tom Raftery on Twitter, and just there's not many Tom Rafterys on LinkedIn. I'm easy enough to find there too. So any places like that. I'm on Instagram as well, but not as active there as I am on Twitter and LinkedIn. So any of those places are good to find me.
Excellent. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you once again to IoT Tech Expo Europe for sponsoring today's episode. Once again, please get your tickets. The link will be in the description.
Thanks for tuning in to the IoT podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on whatever platform you're on. See you next week for more IoT talks and tales.